Hey there, horror fans, and welcome to the Eric Fright Show, your go-to haunt for all things spooky. I'm your horror host, Eric, and each episode, we dive deep into the heart of horror, from real-life nightmares to the silver screen's most terrifying moments. So, grab your popcorn, dim those lights, and let's plunge into another chilling Fright Fest together. Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of the Eric Fright Show. I'm your host, Eric Fright, and I'm so excited to be starting this podcast with everyone. I feel a sense of duty to be a little bit transparent in what to expect with this show, but also to finally put to rest the Horror Within Me podcast. So those of you who have never heard of me, my name is Eric Fright, and I used to do a podcast called The Horror Within Me that I started in January of 2022 and ended it a few months ago. Now, while that show is my baby, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with a podcast. I knew I wanted to start a podcast. I knew it wanted to be horror related, and that was it. And so I was trying so many different things, and there's a lot of episodes. Every episode I'm very proud of, but it was so all over the place in my opinion, and really wasn't reflective of exactly what I was trying to do, who I was trying to be in terms of, my persona to everyone, because I was really trying to rediscover myself in horror. I've always been a diehard horror fan, and for a while I really did suppress it, and then I just was able to rediscover that and re-enter this community. Well, really just enter this community for the first time digitally. So that's where the Horror Within Me came from, and through that journey I found Eric Fright, who has always been there, just didn't know his name. So that is where we are now, which is the Eric Fright Show. So the Eric Fright Show is 4 segments every 2 weeks for the show, and each segment has its own little thing that we're going to do. So the first segment is called Fright Files, and that's where I dive into real life horror stories that parallel the themes or atmospheres of the main featured film. The second segment, which is going to be called Featured Fright, is my in-depth discussion where I focus on a specific horror movie or TV show. So each episode I'm going to dissect the plot, analyze characters, discuss themes, ratings, my personal feelings on it, all the bulk of what we're going to be talking about. Then we're going to segue into the third segment, which is Frightful Facts. And in Frightful Facts, I'm going to give you 10 facts about our featured fright. And then every episode we're going to end with Fright Picks, which will be I will give you 5 horror movie recommendations I think you should watch. And so that's really what the heart of this show is going to be. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It gets to showcase my love to tell personal stories, but also find the true crime into everything, because I'm also a true crime junkie. So it's a great way to add that to this. And then it's also just a really fun way to talk about movies that I have seen and that I love, or maybe don't love, but want to talk about why I don't love them, but also learning facts about movies that I might not have known. And then while I'm learning that, I get to share those facts with you, whether you may or may not have known them. And it's just a way to really connect more with all of you and old and new listeners. Thank you for joining. So with that ramble of an introduction on what you can expect, we're going to dive right into the first segment, Fright Files. So the theme for this episode's Fright Files is nightmares. Now, I am someone who suffers from nightmares, so this topic is very personal and very interesting to me. And now when I mean I suffer from nightmares, I know everyone has nightmares. It's not that I think I'm very special in that aspect, but what I mean is that I have these very vivid and extreme nightmares sometimes that I wake up almost in night terrors. So for nightmares, that's what I mean, that it's very personal for me. But I wanted to, say what is a nightmare, right? So I wanted to go to the actual definition first. So for those of you who don't know the definition of a nightmare, According to Webster's dictionary, nightmare has 3 definitions. The first one being an evil spirit formerly thought to oppress people during sleep. Second, a frightening dream that usually awakens the sleeper. And then third, something, such an experience, situation, or object having the monstrous character of a nightmare or producing a feeling of anxiety or terror. So, again, we all have nightmares at some point, but like, what are the theories behind why we have nightmares, right? So I went over to the sleepfoundation.org, found an article I want to share a couple pieces of. The article is called Why We Have Nightmares and How to Prevent Them. Now, this was last updated according to their website on May 2nd, 2024. And it says that nightmares, their definition of what our nightmares are. This says, quote, in sleep medicine, nightmares have a more strict definition than in everyday language. This definition helps distinguish nightmares from bad dreams. While both involve disturbing dream content, only a nightmare causes you to wake up from sleep. So that was really interesting. And then another part of this article asks, are nightmares normal? And it says, going on to say, it is normal for both children and adults to have bad dreams and nightmares every now and again. About 2% to 8% of adults have problems with nightmares. Frequent nightmares are more common in children than in adults, and nightmares in children are most prevalent between the ages of 3 and 6 and tend to occur less often as children get older. In some cases, though, nightmares persist into adolescence and adulthood. For example, a study found that 47% of college students had at least one nightmare in the past 2 weeks. Nightmares affect males and females, although women are generally more likely to report having nightmares, especially during adolescence through middle age. Now, I thought that was really, really interesting that females seem to have more nightmares than males. I just didn't even consider gender being a factor. Another part, now, this is according to, again, sleepfoundation.org, what causes nightmares. It goes on to say, many different factors can contribute to a higher risk of nightmares. They include stress and anxiety, such as sad, traumatic, or worrisome situations that induce stress and fear may provoke nightmares. People with chronic stress and anxiety may be more likely to develop nightmare disorders. The second is mental health conditions. They says nightmares are often reported at much higher rates by people with mental health disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder. People with PTSD often have frequent, intense nightmares in which they relive traumatic events, worsening symptoms of PTSD and often contributing to insomnia. The third cause they list is certain drugs and medications. So they say using some types of illicit substances of prescription medications that affect the nervous system is associated with a higher risk of nightmares. And they also go on to say withdrawal from some medications that suppress REM sleep can help contribute to nightmares, sleep deprivation, family history, and personal history of nightmares. These are what the sleepfoundation.org classify of what can cause nightmares. And then it ends with how can nightmares affect your sleep, which we all know. It says insufficient sleep connected to nightmares and nightmare disorder can cause excessive daytime sleepiness, mood changes, and worsened cognitive function, all of which can have a substantial negative impact on a person's daytime activities and quality of life. Nightmares may also exacerbate mental health conditions that can worsen sleep, and insufficient sleep can give rise to more pronounced symptoms of conditions like depression and anxiety. So I thought all that was really interesting that I wanted to share with everyone. Again, you can go and check out this article yourself if you want to read the entire thing. It's called Why We Have Nightmares and How to Prevent Them on the sleepfoundation.org. So let's talk about a more personal level, right? I want to talk about what my most terrifying nightmare was that I remember. So there is this nightmare that I remember that has always stuck with me. So I first had it when I was like a small kid. I'm talking like 9-10 years old. So my mom's father died when I was 9. So I was very young, obviously. I don't remember too much about him now. I know that he had Alzheimer's disease, and he always called me by my cousin's name, my one cousin. So every time we would go visit my grandmother and my grandfather, before we would leave, we would give them a hug and a kiss. So one would be kissing, like giving my grandmother a hug and a kiss. My pop-up would say, like, give me a kiss. He'd call me by so and so and like say, give me a kiss, and we'd go over and like give him a kiss, a hug and a kiss on the cheek when we were getting ready to leave. What I do remember most about that experience is they were both cigarette smokers. My grandmother always had like a Coors Light, and my grandfather always had like a Scotch or something, and he had always had always like a prickly like stubble on his cheek, and he always smelled like cigarettes and liquor. There's just something that always like just was always there. Even at like the young age I was, I didn't know what the smell really was, but I knew it was like that's the association that I had with him, right? So he ended up going to the hospital because he suffered a bad stroke. They came home. I think my grandmother came home, and they found him on the floor, and he was purple at that point. Like, he was pretty bad. That I knew. I wasn't allowed to go visit him because I was so young, but there was a lot happening. They tried to get me to come see him through a window. I don't really remember seeing anything. I think he was on a ventilator. Again, those details were kept from me because of my age. But I do know that one day I came home from school and my mother told me that he had died. So that was my first real experience with someone I knew dying. And I don't know, like, if I really comprehended what that meant at the time. Like, I knew what dying meant because I watched horror movies, but I don't think I understood it fully. I don't think I was possible to understand it fully. But I remember when it was going to be my first viewing, like open casket funeral. So we went to the funeral, and I wasn't ready. I remember seeing him, and I can still see him now. Like, he was in I believe it was like a gray suit, and he just had like a bunch of makeup on because he just looked, you know what I mean? If you've ever been to like an older person's funeral, they really kind of try to make them look their best with all the makeup. And I just remember just staring at him and the makeup, because he just didn't look the same. And that look of how he looked chilled me to the bone, like just terrified me. So I don't know how much time had passed after the funeral, but that's when this nightmare started to happen for me. So the one that has always stuck with me, and it even, like, I hate talking about it because I'm always afraid it's going to happen again, is we were in the back seat of my parents' station wagon. Yes, we had a station wagon. And I remember being in the back seat. I don't remember who was driving. There was nothing important like that. I just remember sitting in the back seat, and then there were like these chains rattling behind me, in the third row. And I'm like, what is that sound? And it kept getting louder and louder. And then I turned around and realized that like my parents' station wagon was also like just a hearse, and there was someone chained the casket chains trying to get out of the casket. And when they opened, like, it was my grandfather, and he looked like he did in the casket. So I fell between the back seat and the driver's seat with just like this paralyzing fear as my dead grandfather was like reaching over the seat trying to grab me, while the entire time he just kept saying, "Give me a kiss, give me a kiss." And then I woke up. Listen, I'm almost 38 years old, and this nightmare still freaking terrifies me. Just something about it, it was so real, and he was trying to get me. And I don't know, that for me was probably one of the worst nightmares that I've ever had in my life, even as up until adulthood. So I just wanted to share that story with you guys. So that got me thinking, what about other people's nightmares? Have they shared them online? I'm sure. So I went over and I found this other nightmare that someone had shared a couple years ago on Reddit. And it says, and it doesn't really have a name, it just says delete it. But I'm going to read this person's nightmare to you all. Okay, here we go. It says, I used to have sleep paralysis as a kid. The attic trapdoor was in my bedroom. It's just a little door in the ceiling that leads to the attic. I had a repetitive dream of a creature that was about 8 feet long, about horse height, 4 legs with talons on each, a face and jaw like a gulper eel, on a long neck with 4 milky white eyes that would blink wetly. It had a long tail and the skin was leathery and wet like an eel. It would sinisterly crawl out of the attic trap, followed by an inky, oppressive darkness. It would sniff around the room like it was looking for me. I'd watch it, unable to move until my whole body woke up and it would disappear. I also would have a reoccurring sleep paralysis dream where a skin and bones man with pale skin and visible veins and lots of blotchy red spots on his skin would crawl animally out from under the bed. He was mostly bald with a few strings of lank gray hair. His eye sockets were empty and his teeth a ruin of broken teeth. His ribs would be showing like he was so hungry, and he would turn his empty, ruined eye sockets to me and just stare and breathe, smiling, with his tense, skeletal fingers clutching at the carpet on the floor. I have drawings of both creatures in sketchbooks from when I was younger. I haven't had sleep paralysis in over a decade. I have no clue why it stopped. That person's nightmare of the old man is worse. It sounds so fucking terrifying. I mean, the way they describe the person, like the eye sockets, the teeth, the smiling would have sent me into an institution. I mean, wow. Like when you think about it, like what our brains come up with, like are our brains creating these people, or do you think that we are in these other realms where worlds and realms are clashing, colliding, and commingling together? Because I mean, where are all of this? Like my dream, obviously PTSD, young age. It was my grandfather. There was a lot of memories associated, but like this person was having like full blown monsters that he had no association with, or they had no association with, that were visiting them during sleep paralysis. Like that's just got to be freaking terrifying. But I want to know if you have any of those, nightmares that you just can't shake or get rid of. Go over to Eric Fright Show on Facebook or X, formerly known as Twitter, and share those nightmares with me. I would love to read them. Or you can even add them to the comment section wherever you're listening to the podcast and let me know your most terrifying nightmare. But that concludes the first segment of this episode. It's time to move on to our featured fright. Attention horror fans, I am thrilled to announce my collaboration with the legendary Fangoria. Whether you're a die-hard horror fanatic or you just love a good scare, Fangoria's got you covered with the best in horror news, features, and collectibles. And guess what? As a special treat for my listeners, you can now get 20% off your entire order at Fangoria.com. Just use promo code The Eric Fright Show at checkout. Don't miss out on this killer deal. Stock up on all things horror and join the frightful fun. Stay spooky, my friends. Now, back to the show. So this episode's featured fright is the iconic 1984 film A Nightmare on Elm Street from the late, great Wes Craven. So this year, it does mark 40 years since the release of this classic, so it really does feel correct that it's my first episode. I have almost like a tie-loving relationship with The Nightmare on Elm Street like I do with Halloween. They're like neck to neck with me. Freddy Krueger is iconic. Nancy Thompson is the final girl. The movies are amazing. Even with the worst ones, there's still a lot of great lore to them. And I'm very excited because I have a ticket to finally meet Robert Englund. I'm going to have him sign my glove. I'm very excited about it. I did get to meet Heather Langenkamp last year, so that was like a bucket list item. So I am very excited. But we're going to move into a little bit more of a let's understand the characters first, right? Understand the plot. Like we've all been talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street for, again, almost 40 years, but like let's try and dissect it a little bit more with my perspective. But in order to do that, we have to relay the groundwork. So what is the plot of A Nightmare on Elm Street? On IMDb, the plot is: teenager Nancy Thompson must uncover the dark truth concealed by her parents after she and her friends become targets of the spirit of a serial killer with a bladed glove in their dreams, in which if they die, it kills them in real life. So the ratings for A Nightmare on Elm Street on IMDb are 7.4 out of 10 and Rotten Tomatoes audience score of 84%. So we're going to get into all of the characters and who played them and a little kind of description of them. So coming in first, we have Nancy Thompson, who is portrayed by Heather Langenkamp. She's the protagonist of the movie and is described as a resilient and resourceful young woman who finds herself thrust into a terrifying battle against the malevolent Freddy Krueger. So I think that's a really accurate representation of that character, description of that character. Next, we have Glenn, who is portrayed by Johnny Depp, and this is Johnny Depp's first film. Throwing a little fact out there in between facts. He is considered the quintessential supportive boyfriend character with a touch of teenage innocence. He is depicted as the caring and loyal boyfriend of Nancy Thompson. Then we have Tina Gray, who is portrayed by Amanda Weiss, and she is considered a complex character who embodies both vulnerability and strength. She is introduced as the girlfriend of Rod Lane, who is Tina is also Nancy's best friend. And then we know Rod Lane, who is played by Nick Corey, and he is more of a character with a troubled past who has that bad boy exterior, and is Tina's boyfriend. Then we have Marge Thompson, who is Nancy's mom, and she's played by Ronnie Blakely. She's considered complex with a troubled past, and she does have a deep maternal instinct, but also she's got a drinking problem. Then we move on to Nancy's dad, who's Lieutenant Donald Thompson, played by John Saxon, who is he's like a character with a strong sense of duty and a troubled relationship with his daughter. Now, I didn't realize that Marge and Donald were not together anymore when I was younger watching it, but now that I watch it older, I realize that they aren't living together. They're not a couple anymore. I think that's kind of where it strains everything out. Then lastly, we have Freddy Krueger, who is portrayed by none other than Robert Englund, and he is the iconic antagonist of the movie. He is known for his burned face, razor blade glove, and dark sense of humor. Freddy Krueger is introduced as the vengeful spirit of a child murderer who was burned alive by the parents of Elm Street, seeking justice for his heinous crimes. So the characters of A Nightmare on Elm Street, that's one of the things I do love about this franchise, is that even in the very first one, they establish these characters so well, and they all have rich characterizations. You know, they're not just one and dones. They are all complex, and they all are people and characters that you can really get behind and care about. And I think that's what really helps with this franchise, because it's so rooted in so much going on that it really can be related to, like, for Outcast. You know, this is really an Outcast kind of movie. But what are some of the themes, right, of A Nightmare on Elm Street? Like, there are several recurring themes that contribute towards enduring impact on audiences. So here are some of the most common themes found in the film. The first is, of course, the power of fear. So the film delves into the concept of fear and its ability to control and manipulate individuals, right? Freddy preys on the fears of victims. He uses their nightmares against them to inflict terror and ultimately brings about their demise, right? Another theme is how the blurring of reality and dreams is played out. It really does a great job of blurring lines between dreams and reality, creating a sense of uncertainty and disorientation for both the characters as well as the audiences. The film challenges the notion of what is real and what is imagined, leading to a heightened sense of psychological horror. There's so many times where we don't realize that our character has fallen asleep because it's exactly the same thing that's going on while they were awake, and that's really so well done, and Wes Craven does an amazing job of doing that transition. There's another theme, which is really the sins of the past. The theme about that is the coming back to haunt you, right? Freddy is a spirit who is coming back because of the injustice he thinks is inflicted upon him by the parents of Elm Street, because they decided to take law into their own hands and they burned him alive for his crimes because, he got off on a technicality. So the consequences of that are continuing to, happen to these parents and these kids later on. Another theme that we see in this is a theme of survival and empowerment. Now, despite overwhelming odds, right, stacked against these teenagers, the characters demonstrate resilience and resourcefulness in their fight against Freddy Krueger, especially our heroine Nancy Thompson. We see her setting traps. She takes, she seeks Freddy out. She purposely goes to sleep. She has Glenn watch her. The survival instincts of okay, enough is enough. I'm going to face this dream demon and I'm going to figure out a way to beat him is heavily implied. It's very different than what we've seen in other horror movies, even Halloween. I love Halloween. I love Laurie Strode, but Laurie Strode didn't, she survived because she did fight off Michael when she could, but she didn't seek Michael out. So the survival instincts were very different for this film. And then my last theme that I wanted to talk about is the fragility of sanity. So A Nightmare on Elm Street really does explore how fragile the human mind is and the thin line between sanity and madness, especially when we look at when Nancy's in the dream clinic, right? And she goes into that one nightmare there, and when she wakes up, her hair's turning gray from being terrified. That people think that she's going crazy, and it's just that line that they really talk about how thin a line is, that people just assume that you're losing your mind, and it just can be so quick to happen. But those are some of the themes that I wanted to discuss because I thought they were really interesting and a fun way to really talk more about this iconic movie. But I want to move on a little bit and talk more about my personal thoughts on this film, right? I do not have a memory of the first time that I saw A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's just one of those movies that I saw at a young age, and I don't know a time of not knowing anything about it. You know what I mean? But I did want to share a funny story that I have about this movie. And it's actually not about me, but a story that my mom told me and my sisters about the first time that she watched this movie. So I think she said it was around the first time that the movie was airing on cable TV. So my mom, who was also a horror fan, decided she was going to watch it. So forgive me if this is incorrect. I mean, my sisters won't remember and my mother is no longer with us. So, I mean, I guess this version is probably the closest to what happened now anyway. But, so, here we go. She said somewhere around halfway through the movie when she was watching it, around the time I think Tina appears to Nancy at the school. So somewhere at that point, I think is what she said. My one sister, who was around 2 or 3 at the time, she was sleepwalking or something and walked downstairs, and our stairs in the house, that our childhood home, you had a couple of stairs, a little landing, and then you would turn left and go up. So she was standing on the landing, just standing there. And my mom saw her out the corner of her eye and almost had a freaking heart attack because she just seen this figure staring and standing at, out at her from the corner of her eye from the living room. So there was the living room and the little dining area and then the stairs. So it was a little bit of a distance, but yeah, I would have been terrified too if I would have seen that. Can you imagine you're watching a horror movie about a child murderer and then a small child is standing in a nightgown staring at you with no a blank expression? I can't. She's still weird, and you know who you are. You know who you are. If it were me, I would have knocked her the hell out. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I'm not about child abuse in any shape or form at all. But for me, personally, when I think back to A Nightmare on Elm Street, it was really a founding film that began my obsession with the horror genre. the score, the characters, and especially Freddy and Nancy, and the idea that there really is no escape from this monster really resonated with me. And Freddy was just really different than all the others. You know, he was more personal, more intimate in a way that the other slasher villains just weren't. This film became like a go-to comfort film when I needed an escape from my real-life horrors of living in a home with like an abusive father, an alcoholic mother, and they just hated each other. So Nancy taught me survival tactics that I still use to this day. No lie, like there's just, I remember watching and studying these films, especially the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and how these, you know, Nancy's mother was an alcoholic, and even though I didn't really understand alcoholism, I understood what it looked like, and I really connected with Nancy. And so watching her go after Freddy, watching her set traps, like learning to take control, really stuck with me, and I like added that to my, you know, survival 101 in my own way. I think it's just, I know it sounds weird and like a cliche to some of you, but I have a feeling that most of you understand exactly what I mean when I say that I have studied and really connected with that character. But I do want to share my favorite part of this movie, which is the scene in the school when Tina appears to Nancy in the bloody body bag. Now, we talked about this earlier, how I'm terrified of like dead people. So like that fucked me up. What a terrifying scene. I just, you know, Nancy's 15 or 16. Her best friend was just murdered. She's dreaming of her dead friend in a body bag, calling out to her. It goes without saying that this is also a guilt trip that Tina needed her and she couldn't get to her. But she, like, in a dream, like, you know, in a dream, we don't really have control of everything either. So she doesn't realize she's dreaming, and she's getting up and following her friend, knowing that in reality, like, no one's going to actually do that. But in our dreams, we do these things, right? So she follows her down to the school basement that turned into this boiler room and is confronted by Freddy. And that's just a masterpiece in horror cinema. Like, it really hit how we fall asleep, and it's like everything's a normal, and we just end up in a whole new world that don't even make sense when you think about it. But in our dreams, it does. And I think Wes Craven did a phenomenal job at blending all of that together and really making it work. This movie just helped me in so many ways, and is just the scariest shit too. It earns the number 2 spot of my all-time favorite horror movies. And it's literally a half a point away from my number 1 spot, which is Halloween. But I'm telling you, they're like neck and neck. They could be tied. It could be also number 1 and share number 1 with Halloween, honestly. And my favorite kill in this movie would have to be, there's a lot of kills, and everyone loves the iconic Tina death scene. It is iconic, but for me, my favorite kill is Glenn's death scene. It's just so brutal, and we can't even see what's happening, and it's just blood shooting out, his mom and dad coming in, the screaming, and the back and forth between Nancy and then the scene of his death. It's just so powerful, and we don't get that all the time in these horror movies. We get these quick deaths, and it's not, or it just doesn't have the same effect like that we felt for every character in that moment. But that is what's going to lead into the next segment, which is going to be segment 3, Frightful Facts. All right, it's time for Frightful Facts, and now I just want to let you all know that obviously all of these facts can be found across the internet, and especially for iconic movies such as this one. Some of these might have been known, some of them might not have, but it has been 40 years and a lot of coverage on A Nightmare on Elm Street. But here are the 10 Frightful Facts that I have found for A Nightmare on Elm Street. So did you guys know that it was a real-life inspiration? That writer and director Wes Craven did draw inspiration for the film's premise from a series of newspaper articles about a Cambodian boy who had died in his sleep after experiencing nightmares. I thought that was really interesting. I got that fact from Collider.com. Next fact is Tina's death scene, which was used with several creative techniques that were employed to achieve its visual effects. For example, Tina being dragged across the ceiling was actually achieved by a special set that rotated the room. That comes from ScreenRant.com. Our third frightful fact is this is Johnny Depp's first movie ever. Now, the reason he was cast, though, was he was cast after director Wes Craven's daughter vouched for him. So thank you, Miss Craven. And that is also from ScreenRant.com. The fourth frightful fact is regarding that infamous bathtub scene. So the scene in which Nancy is pulled into her bathtub by Freddy's glove was actually achieved by using a bottomless tub that was connected to a water tank beneath the set. And it's said that actress Heather Langenkamp had to be careful not to fall into the tank during filming. That comes from Quora.com. Now, another one from Screen Rant. A lot of these are from Screen Rant. Number 5's fact is the nursery rhyme, and I didn't know this. The nursery rhyme, the 1-2 Freddy's coming for you, is an adaptation of 1-2 Buckle My Shoe. I had no idea, so I wonder if anyone else knew about that. 6th frightful fact is the film contains several hidden references and Easter eggs of other movies. And so, especially this one, if anyone has noticed, when Nancy's in her room, when she's watching TV, the movie she's watching is The Evil Dead. Again, this is from ScreenRant.com. Number 7 is a fun one for me. Did you guys know that production used more than 500 gallons of fake blood in that movie? It sounds not enough to me. It sounds like there should be more just between Tina and Glenn's scene alone. But apparently 500 gallons of fake blood was used in the making of that film, courtesy of ScreenRant.com again. I think the rest of these, the next two are definitely from Screen Rant. I'm not going to keep saying it. Number 8, it says, it took 3 hours to apply Robert Englund's makeup. 3 hours, guys? 3 hours is a long, long, long time. Like, it might not seem that way when you're talking and thinking about it, but just really imagine sitting somewhere for 3 hours where somebody's putting makeup on your face. It sounds terrible, but he did an amazing job, and he's done this for 7 films, and then he was like on the Goldbergs and TV shows. Like, he's done so many hours putting that makeup on. Crazy. I wonder if they ever got it on better. I have to look that up. Anyway, number 9's frightful fact is that originally Freddy wore a red and yellow sweater. And what is that? Ketchup and mustard? Ew, can you imagine? I'd rather the red and green Christmas sweater. I just don't feel like the red and yellow just wouldn't have the same effect. And our last frightful fact, courtesy of the NewYorkPost.com, says Craven came up with Freddy wearing a fedora hat from a terrifying experience he had as a kid. And I looked more into that, and apparently when he was younger in the apartment building he lived in, he saw a man outside walking with a fedora, and the man was standing across the street and looking directly at him with a weird, crazy smile, I believe, and terrified him, and the guy started to walk towards the building to get in. Just a really, really terrifying story, and I'm telling you, I probably would have had nightmares too. And thankfully for Wes Craven, happened because we got Freddy Krueger and the iconic A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. But at the time, that must have been just horrible for that little boy. But that concludes segment 3, Frightful Facts, which means it's time to get into our final segment, which is Fright Picks. Now, I don't want to leave you high and dry with nothing to do until the next time that me and you are together. So I'm going to give you 5 movies that I recommend you watch to keep your heart racing and your fright level full. First movie I'm going to recommend to you is Hell House LLC, which is streaming on Shudder. The IMDb synopsis is 5 years after an unexplained malfunction causes the death of 15 tour-goers and staff on the opening night of a Halloween haunted house tour, a documentary crew travels back to the scene of the tragedy to find out what really happened. This was a hidden gem for me. This movie is terrifying, and that's all I'm going to say. Definitely go and check it out. Second fright pick I have for you guys are The People Under the Stairs from 1991, also a Wes Craven film, by the way. I see it's available for rent on Amazon Prime for about $3.99. The synopsis from IMDb is: two adults and a juvenile break into a house occupied by a brother and sister and their stolen children. There, they must fight for their lives. Now, this is also like a fright pick for you, but also a fright pick for me because I haven't watched this movie since I was a kid because it terrified me so goddamn much. So it's my personal goal to watch this movie before the next episode as well because it's out there and I want to watch it because I am older and I want to see it and have more of a memory of it. Number 3 for you is Talk to Me from 2022, and you can also rent this from Amazon Prime. And at this time, it's $4.99. It might be somewhere else by the time this episode airs. Synopsis from IMDb is: when a group of friends discovers how to conjure spirits using an embalmed hand, they become hooked on the new thrill until one of them goes too far and unleashes terrifying supernatural forces. This movie is wild. It's an A24 film, so you already know. I've heard mixed reviews. I think my sister didn't find it great. I liked the idea of it. I liked it was like a new take on like a Ouija board, but it was like an embalmed hand, and I could see this happening in real life. The fourth movie I have for you is on Netflix, and it is The Autopsy of Jane Doe from 2016. The synopsis from IMDb is: a father and son, both coroners, are pulled into a complex mystery while attempting to identify the cause of death of a young woman who was apparently harboring dark secrets. This is probably one of the most recent movies that have actually terrified me to the bone, like chilled me to the bone. It'll probably be a future episode at some point. It's a refreshing take on a lot, and I just, as I'm going to say, you already know if you're listening why this probably has gotten me so bad, the whole dead body thing. But it was just a really eerie and slow burn, scary movie. It's just so well done. Definitely check it out. And my last fright pick for everyone is Hellraiser from 1987, which you can get on AMC Plus. And everyone I know has heard of Hellraiser, but if you were like me, you might not have watched it. I just watched it for the first time maybe a year or two ago. So the synopsis is: a woman discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her brother-in-law and lover. She starts killing for him to revitalize his body and escape the demonic beings that are pursuing him after he escaped their underworld. Everyone has heard of the iconic Pinhead. I have to be honest, I've only seen the first one and probably the remake. I have to go back and watch the franchise. I know it's probably not the best like some of them, but it's on my bucket list of movies to watch all over again. But the original Hellraiser is just amazing. And also shout out to Clive Barker, who's a member of my community, for making this amazing freaking horror movie. We love the contribution and we love him. So definitely go and show support. But that is it, guys. Thank you for joining me. Stay safe. Stay spooky. Bye. That's a wrap on this episode of The Eric Fright Show. Thanks for tuning in and letting me share my love of horror with you. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps me reach more horror fans like you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And until next time, stay spooky and keep it frightening.